One of the things that when I talk to managers that they feel real relief around is actually when I say to them what their role is not. So they're not a GP, they're not a counsellor, they're not the person's friend, they're their manager. And the best way they can serve that person is to play that role and play it really well, rather than straying outside into friendship or therapy or, physiotherapy or whatever it is.
Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium Show. Delighted to be here, delighted that you are here, and delighted that my guest today is Becky Thoseby. And Becky is the head of workplace wellbeing at the Ministry of Justice in London. So thank you. It's so great to finally speak to you because I know we've been trying to set this up for a long time, and here we are now. I'm in the summer and you're in the winter. I'm in the evening and you're in the morning, but through the wonders of technology we get to speak. So how are you today, Becky?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a bit chilly, but all good.
Yeah, it's very cold, isn't it, in the UK at the moment?
I was just looking at my thermometer before I came on, and it had not even reached 0. So I'm quite envious of you and the sunshine.
Yeah, it's kind of warm here. Let's kind of jump straight in. And for people who aren't familiar with you and the work that you do, I'd love you to just share a little bit about your background. Head of workplace wellbeing for the Ministry of Justice comes with a lot of responsibility. And I'd love to understand your path to doing what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I was kind of an HR professional for many, many years, and those of your listeners who are also HR professionals will be familiar with a lot of the kind of standard roles I did. So I worked in recruitment, I did some business partnering, employee relations, and I kind of came to wellbeing by accident, really. I often get people contact me and ask for advice about how they can move into this area as their career, and I feel slightly disappointed when I can't tell them I've got this magic formula. But I just kind of happened to be in the right place at the right time. The workplace wellbeing was really, really coming up the agenda in the UK. And at the same time, I was on my own kind of personal wellbeing journey. I'd had some quite significant health challenges. And I was looking at some things like diet, exercise. I'd become a mindfulness practitioner. I'd qualified as a wellbeing coach. And so I was doing some things at work sort of in my spare time. So I ran a meditation group at lunchtime. I was providing wellbeing coaching kind of outside of my working hours. And our HR director felt that the organisation needed a full-time person doing workplace wellbeing, and approached me and kind of said, well, who else is it going to be? And really, it was my dream job. It was just it was a dream for me to be offered that, really. So initially it was on a 6-month trial period. After 3 months, they said, this is so obviously working out that let's just make you permanent. And that was not where I am now. That was in the UK Department for Transport, which was a much smaller organisation, somewhere that I'd spent many years, and I'd had a few different jobs. And then after a while, I kind of thought, well, I can't stay here forever, even though I had a really strong support network. It felt like a family, really. It felt like my home. It was with many a backward glance that I did leave. But this role at the Ministry of Justice came up. It just looked so interesting. And so I moved here, and I've been here since just before the pandemic. I think really? I had 6 weeks in post before the UK had our first lockdown. So it's something of a baptism of fire. But yeah, I love it here. It's so fascinating. The senior team are really, really excellent. And there are some really, really committed, intelligent, capable people. I think more so than any organisation I've worked in, actually. I've been so impressed with the quality of the people that I've been working with.
Wow, it's amazing. And was that the first time there was someone doing the role you're doing at the Ministry of Justice, or was there a predecessor?
There was a predecessor, so that was a temporary role. I think that was at the time, a lot of organisations are kind of doing this. They put someone in place temporarily to sort of see how it goes. So that person was in a temporary role, and then they made it permanent, and that's when I applied.
Amazing. So it really is your kind of dream job. So I can see why when you kind of described the path, it's like you worked on a personal level, and then you brought that into your professional context, and I guess your HR training put you in a really good position to be able to kind of build on that and bring almost the two worlds together, your HR expertise and your passion for wellness and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't thought of it in that way before, actually, but you put it so clearly. And yeah, those two spheres really did align, and I just feel like I found my niche, and this is a job that aligns so closely with my personal values and my kind of skill set.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I think when that happens, you get that intrinsic motivation that we all aspire to and we read about. But when you've experienced it, you know what that means. I'd like to just move on now and just talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, and particularly focused, because having run the Wellbeing at Work Summit now, so we've run it 8 times this year, so of course that's given me access to some of the insights from all of the leading companies around the world. And one word that comes up a lot is holistic, and that we need to think more holistically, and we need to behave more holistically. And when I look back through my own journey, so I've been in this space now for probably 8-9 years, and it's really evolved, right? At the beginning, it was very health and safety, more physical. That was the focus. Mm-hmm. Then we kind of moved through this mental health era, which, arguably we're still in. But now there's a lot more talk about holistic. We need to think holistically. We need to behave holistically. I'd love to get your perspective on that and, what that means, because I know there's a lot of misunderstanding, let's say, like people use the word, but perhaps they don't really know what it means. But as a person in your position with your experience and your perspective, I'd love to jump into that and say, what does a holistic experience look like? How can we think holistically and behave in that way?
Sure. So, I mean, I definitely agree with the sort of picture that you've outlined about having gone from health and safety to sort of mental health. And now I think a lot of organizations are talking about doing wellbeing holistically. But as you say, I think a lot of people talk about it without understanding what it really means. I've certainly talked to many of my peers who say, oh yeah, we have a holistic approach, and then list all the issues that they're focusing on. So having more issues that you're focusing on doesn't mean that you've got a holistic approach. It still means that you have an issue-focused approach. You're just focusing on more things. And the problem with that is that you end up kind of playing whack-a-mole. There's always something new that's going to be coming up. And you can't whack all the moles all of the time. So what we do at the MOJ, I call it the person-centered approach. So instead of focusing on issues, we look at each employee as if they are a unique individual with their own package of needs. And it's then about creating the conditions where each person can be their best and thrive in the workplace. And there's a number of different kind of roles to play there. The individual has a role in taking responsibility for their own well-being. The line manager has a responsibility to kind of enable the right choices and to create the conditions where the employee can thrive. I mean, the line manager actually is key to everything. We know from research that they're the primary determinant of workplace well-being. So actually we focus a lot on the line manager and upskilling line managers. And then leaders really set the tone for the whole thing, right? Because the line manager has to be in a position where they have implicit and explicit permission to make the right decisions and to empower the employee. And they can't do that without the right leadership climate. So, as I said, a lot is really focusing on the line manager. And rather than building capability for line managers in particular issues, so you'll be aware a lot of organisations have provided training for their line managers in mental health. In the UK, we're talking a lot about menopause now. So then there's, oh, well, let's train all managers in menopause. But actually then what happens if the manager has someone working for them who actually their mental health is fine and they're not experiencing menopause, but actually they have, like, I don't know, irritable bowel syndrome. And then the manager is like, oh no, I haven't done the training on that. So what we're trying to do is actually upskill managers about what good behavior looks like as a manager in the wellbeing space. So what are their roles and responsibilities in the wellbeing space, and what actually drives workplace wellbeing? So educating managers that it's not really about having a lunchtime yoga class, it's much more about having, you know, role clarity and autonomy and that kind of thing, and helping managers to have those all important wellbeing conversations. There's a lot of fear around that, I think, on both sides of the table. And actually, it surprised me, one of the things that when I talk to managers that they feel real relief around is actually when I say to them what their role is not. So you know, they're not a GP, they're not a counsellor, they're not the person's friend, they're their manager. And the best way they can serve that person is to play that role and play it really well, rather than straying outside into friendship or therapy or, you know, physiotherapy or whatever it is. And managers often seem to think that it comes from a place of kindness, right? That they want to help the person, and so they feel like more is better. But actually, it's better if they confine their role to that managerial role and do that really, really well. So yeah, that in a nutshell is kind of what holistic well-being means to me.
I love that. So I guess what I hear when you say that is we want our managers. It is interesting how you focused on that particular role, the managers, because certainly in my own experience, you often see that the managers are focused on issues and are the ones that are burning out. And there's a real disconnect between the leadership at the top of the organization, the senior execs who have the right ideas and the right intentions, but it doesn't get translated down to the shop floor, so to speak. And it is because the managers are not skilled. And I really like this people-centered approach. And I guess what I understand by that is that you're training your managers to take more interest in their people. So ask the right questions, understand where the people are, but also recognize that they've got a backup of support who are specialists, so that they're not counselors and they're not dipping into that area, but they are aware of an EAP or whatever support services there are. But them as managers are doing their job to ensure that the person feels supported and is there to to be guided, but at the same time, if they are talking about specific issues which potentially could impact their well-being, the manager's there to listen and to guide, as opposed to fix and to be an expert at all of these different things. Well, so that, I guess, just immediately just listening to you, that has an enormous potential to really impact the well-being of the managers, who I feel have been in this very challenging position over the last few years in particular, where suddenly they're having to manage remotely, they're having to do things that they haven't been trained for, as well as dealing with the mental health or the well-being of their team members, was also ensuring that tasks are implemented and productivity is high. So there's an awful lot of pressure on managers. That's really interesting. I'd love to understand where you are in that journey, because philosophically and conceptually that makes a huge amount of sense, and I'm sure will to a lot of our listeners. But I know a lot of people will think that our starting point is we're dealing with all the issues and we have to train everybody, and it's like it feels like such an enormous transformational task. And I'd love to understand, if we break it down a little bit, what the starting point is, how you do transition, or how you did start to transition in this more holistic direction.
Sure. So, I mean, I must say I came to the organization with this very much in mind. So as I said, I almost didn't want to leave my previous organization. And I came to the interview for this role actually slightly dragging my feet. But once I'd finished the interview, I absolutely skipped out there thinking I really want this job. And the reason was because the way that they were telling me that they wanted someone to do well-being was like this. So they knew they weren't there yet, but that was the aspiration. So I was fortunate in that I came into an organization that already had a desire to go in that direction. But I think the first step has to be education. There's a lot of people out there who think that well-being is about having a fruit delivery and yoga classes at lunchtime and, you know, all those things. But Wellbeing Llamas was the latest one I heard, actually. I have to say that was new.
I haven't heard of that one yet.
No, well, you see, you heard it here first. So, and you know, I think the media has a lot to answer for with that. There's definitely a kind of consumerism driving well-being outside the workplace. You know, buy this product, it's going to change your life. So I do think that well-being has a bit of an image problem. And it's really up to people like us, particularly, you know, the in-house wellbeing leads, to educate people about what wellbeing really is, particularly in the workplace. So, I mean, you mentioned the sort of mental health journey. One of the things that I do quite a lot is kind of try and encourage people to zoom out from that, because there are so many things that drive good well-being in the workplace that I think the unintended consequence of the drive to break the stigma around mental health is that when you say the word well-being, people then think about mental health, whereas actually there's so many other things that drive people's well-being in the workplace. You know, the relationships they have, the environment that they're in, whether they feel safe and secure, whether they have a sense of purpose, that actually we're doing people a disservice by just zooming in on one really small area rather than zooming out and being aware of everything that affects people. So education is a big thing, and we need to educate people at all levels, actually. Now, in an organization my size, this is real, it's a Herculean endeavor. We've got about 88,000 people. 40,000 of those are prison officers, so they don't sit in front of a computer all day. It's really hard to reach people. One of the things we did do that actually went down kind of really well, I feel quite proud of, is we created some explainer videos. So they're little animations, I narrate them, and I had a colleague who put together some little characters, and we talk about, there's one that talks about the person-centered approach, there's one that talks about the role of the line manager. They're just 2 or 3 minutes, and they're on YouTube, so people can watch them on their phone, you know, their personal device, however they want to do it. And that was one way that we were able to really reach people in a kind of lively and engaging way. Anyone has time to watch a 2-minute video. So that was one way that I think that we did really have an impact. But then once people are kind of educated on the concepts, it's then, well, what does that mean for me? And that's where the kind of the training has come in, doing workshops for line managers, but also for senior leaders. So that's kind of how far we've got in our journey. The other thing I'm doing is sort of some proof of concept projects, so testing out possible interventions to see what effect they might have, because you know, this world of workplace wellbeing is so new. It's not like more established areas like learning and development, where you know there is a clear evidence base as to what works and what doesn't. And it's really important to me that the Ministry of Justice is kind of at the cutting edge of this, that we are contributing to that knowledge base in UK workplace wellbeing. So we're doing a few different things. One is testing out the impact of rewarding and recognising positive wellbeing behaviours. One is a project that I'm doing in a group of prisons to look at bringing about a culture of rehabilitation. So I can't give too much detail.
But
that's something that is important to me also, to be testing out new ideas and seeing what works so that we can do more of it.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's a really interesting time, like you say, because workplace well-being is a relatively new concept in the way you're describing it, and we're talking about it here and now. It has moved from that health and safety, but still, you know, at our Sydney Wellbeing at Work, we asked everybody, what does well-being mean to you? And of course, everyone had very different answers to that question. So it is one of those words that will mean very different things. World of workplace wellbeing is a new concept. You know, it's evolved a lot from the days of which I guess we could call the fragmented days. You know, when you talk about issues, it's almost looking at things in a fragmented way rather than that holistic and whole person picture as you describe. You know, which feels like very different. but no one's got the answers. This is interesting. Having listened to 150 presentations from the world's leading organizations over the last 12 months, no one's got the answers. So everyone's experimenting and learning and sharing. So I can see why someone in your position, and I know you're very passionate about evidence-based and really doing things, thoroughly and properly, feels that kind of responsibility to learn and to share, so that we can lift the game in all the organizations. Because I think if we really are going to create many more cultures that are based on well-being, we need more people like yourself who are embedded in those organizations, who are charging forward and learning and sharing, because that's how I think we'll move into that next era where work is very different to how it has been. And I feel we're at that point now where we're transitioning. The last 3 years, I think, has given us an accelerated path to actually change things, and now start to create the the future of work that we've talked about for many years, but it's now here. What I'd love to talk a little bit about now is that kind of evidence base that we've touched on, and how you go about getting evidence, and how you go about measuring impact. I'd be curious how you do that to really understand whether the different initiatives, the different programs, the workshops that you've spoken about are really having a positive impact on the audience.
Well, I think there's two sides to this coin, right? One is the evidence that is present outside the organization and how I tap into that and use that. And then the other side of the coin is, as you said, about measuring the impact of what I'm doing inside the organization. So it's very important to me to be very much up to date with academic research in this space. So I'm lucky enough to have a couple of really excellent contacts in academia. So I'm making sure that I'm always kind of finding out what is the latest research. So although I said there's not a great deal of evidence, there is some. And guess what? A lot of it points towards people just want to be treated as individuals and have their needs met. They want autonomy, to be treated with respect, supported in the workplace, all that kind of stuff. So that's something that I really make sure that I do quite rigorously. But then inside the organization, one of the first things that I wanted to do when I came to the organization those years ago was put together a diagnostic survey. So it's all very well for me to sit here in my ivory tower and imagine what employees need. But actually, there's no way for me to know what people really need without asking them. So I've done 3 pulse surveys now. So in an organization of 88,000 people, it's quite intensive to survey everyone. And actually, we have some very clever statisticians in the organization who explain to me exactly why you don't have to do that. You can just take a sample and that will actually tell you what everyone thinks. So we surveyed a sample across the whole organization 3 times. And we were asking questions which were very much focused on things that we could rectify. So I see a lot of wellbeing surveys that ask questions like, how anxious did you feel yesterday? Well, that's lovely. But actually, if the person says, well, my anxiety was 9 out of 10, well, we don't know why that is, whether it's driven by the workplace, whether it's like climate anxiety, whether they've had a bereavement. So okay, but what are we going to do about it? So we asked questions which were much more diagnostic and able to take action. So for example, one of our real killer questions is, my manager has the capabilities to support me with my well-being. So, Likert scale, strongly agree, and so on. So it was a bunch of questions like that. And we asked it 3 times. 3 times we got almost identical answers. So if you think over the last 3 years, how much things have changed in terms of what you're allowed to do, the pandemic, all that kind of stuff, that shows us that well-being as we are choosing to measure it is not so much driven by factors outside the workplace, but actually people's experience of their working life, which then in turn shows that we're asking the right questions. So having those results has really helped me understand where I need to target my efforts. And it's also given me a license to operate in terms of, you know, saying to senior managers, this is my plan for the next year, and this is why. It's not something that I just sort of dreamed up while I was having a hot drink the other day. So it's really, that survey is kind of the cornerstone of my evidence base. But we also have a really rich sort of arena of ways that we can get anecdotal evidence. So every time I go into the business and speak to someone, that is intelligence about how well-being is landing in their business area. I've got a really good relationship with one of our business partners who tells me about how things are landing kind of in the real world. We've got a range of staff networks who are all very keen to tell me about the well-being of the demographics that they represent, which again is fantastic evidence. So we've got a different range, and I think that it's really, really important to triangulate, you know, what the hard data tells us with people's lived experience and that kind of anecdotal evidence. I should have said actually as well, in the survey, we gave a free text box where people could write whatever they wanted about well-being. And that was something that originally I thought, oh, well, what's the point of that? The analysts and statisticians who kind of helped me with this really encouraged me to do it. And I was so pleased that I did, because, you know, we got the most articulate, well-represented comments from people that were so much better and more real than anything I could have put into words. And actually, when I'm talking to senior leaders about the well-being of people in the organization, it's so much more powerful if I use their own words rather than me describing it from my own point of view.
Completely. That's amazing. Have you, because it feels like it's been a real journey, and of course we can't forget the fact that you started this role 6 weeks before the pandemic, so you've kind of been doing all of this with all of the disruption that we've all experienced. But I'm curious or interested to understand whether you've experienced any blockers or any pushbacks in terms of the people. So there's like a large group of people, many different stakeholders, and obviously your intentions are good to help the well-being of those people and the well-being of the organization. But has everyone been willing to engage, or have you experienced some challenges with different stakeholders?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, anyone in my role will. I think one of my greatest challenges actually is people who think that they really know about this, and they really don't. So a lot of people are kind of willing to learn. So they will say, I'm curious about this. I know it's important, but I don't really know what it is. I don't know what good looks like. And that's my ideal stakeholder, because I can educate them. But there are lots of people in the organization who are doing some really quite hair-raising things and calling it well-being, because, you know, they come to it from all kinds of different backgrounds, or they've had certain life experience that means that they think that they really understand well-being, and usually they do really understand it, but only through one lens. So you know, the classic one is, you know, someone will have a member of their family who's a GP, and then they think, oh well, I really understand well-being, but actually yes, but only through one lens. Or someone who's a yoga teacher and then, you know, comes to the organization and, yeah, I really understand well-being. Well, yes, but again, only from one quite narrow perspective. So I think the biggest challenge is to uneducate people who already think they know. There will, of course, always be the refuseniks, you know, the people who think this is pink and fluffy and it's not for them. And you know what? That's okay, because I'm never going to convert those people. And actually, I don't want to, because there aren't many of them. And I think they will always find a reason. Even when I say, well, actually, well-being is really about organizational health and good productivity, and are you really going to say
yeah, I don't want that. Exactly.
Yeah, I get it. Exactly. I don't want my employees performing their best. But you know, I'm quite at peace with that. I think my other challenge has been that when we did the wellbeing survey, there were a lot of senior stakeholders who were like, we want data, we want data. So, you know, we're a very evidence-led organization. And I think that's one of the reasons that I find it quite exciting working here. But then, you know, when the results came back and people who didn't like the results, found them inconvenient, then started to try and pick apart my methodology, which I completely did not expect. So after the first survey, there were loads of people who said, well, it's not valid because you didn't survey everyone. And you know, that was quite challenging. So I then sort of put my heads together with my statistical colleagues, and they wrote me a methodology note, which explained exactly why the results were valid, and it sort of went through exactly how they did certain things. And that really helped. I was really, really surprised as to how much detail people wanted about how the survey took place and how the results were analysed. Personally, I am really happy that there are people who know more about that stuff than I do, and they can do it for me. I don't need to know how it's done. So yeah, it was surprising to me that there were some people in the organization who really did want to know all the nuts and bolts,
all the details, yeah, so they can, I guess, feel confident in the data. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. One last question, just before we wrap. I'm curious about the team and how you actually, because there's you clearly, and do you have a large team, or do you work with champions in the business, which is a very common approach? But I'm curious how you get to scale, because 88,000 people is a lot of people. How do you do that, just from a resource perspective?
Well, actually, that's a discussion that we're having inside the organisation at the moment, because I think it's become clear over the last sort of 6 months or so that actually I can't do all this as one person. So I have one person who supports me. She's absolutely fantastic, but actually she just does a lot of the grind and the admin and, you know, answering emails and all that kind of stuff. So that is a conversation we're having at the moment. How can we scale up? We do have a network of champions, but I don't think that it's really the right thing because they are not experts, it's not the right thing for them to be actually delivering any of this work. Their role is really to raise awareness and kind of get the good word out there. I wouldn't think it would be appropriate for someone who's not a wellbeing expert to, for example, be providing wellbeing coaching to a bunch of senior leaders. No. So I need to now start thinking about models where I can scale up without losing the quality. So, for example, something I'm looking at around the line manager training is a train the trainer model. So I can't train all the line managers in the organisation, but I can put in place a train the trainer model that enables that to happen, even though I'm not doing it. So I'm very much at the start of that journey. I think the organisation employed me not really realising that I couldn't do it all, and you know, I gave it a good crack.
But it is fascinating, isn't it? Because like what you described is that journey, kind of, they knew there's a problem, so they put in some temporary resource. Then they said, well, actually, this is someone's job, and now they realize it's beyond one person's job. It's a massive thing, and that's what our focus is helping organizations to make wellbeing a strategic priority. Because once it is a strategic priority, that means that resources get allocated to it, accountability, KPIs, then it becomes a strategic priority rather than the peripheral activity, which is the yoga and the fruit bowls that you've alluded to. So thank you, Becky. So last question, which I ask all of my guests, because this podcast is called the Finding Equilibrium Show, and I guess the philosophy that underpins it is very much that balance equals well-being. I know not everyone will agree with that, but I'd love to, and there's no right or wrong answer, but I'd love your perspective on what does finding equilibrium mean to you, and how do you find your own equilibrium, given the responsibilities that you have. And, I think there's a lot of people who are championing the wellbeing strategy sometimes don't have time for their own self-care. But I'd love to get your perspective on those questions.
I think this is a really interesting question, actually, because the word balance is one that I've had difficulty with for many years. I think I'm not sure I actually knew what it meant, and I felt it was quite restrictive. Actually, I had in my mind there was this set of scales and it always had to be perfectly balanced, and it's just not possible. And I think it became much easier for me when I started to understand life more as a jigsaw. So there's all these different bits, and they all have to fit together, and you can't make the jigsaw with more pieces than fit in it, which
I
I
like
see
that.
trying to do. But also, the bits are changing shape and size, sometimes even on a daily basis. So I think I have, in my personal and professional life, learned to let go a little bit. And I used to like to kind of be quite prescriptive. So, if I do such and such a thing, then I will respond in such and such a way. And, I like that predictability. I'm a personality type that craves certainty. I think my well-being has been better when I've kind of just taken things as they come a lot more. Mindfulness has really, really helped me with that. Just that sense of awareness and being in the moment. So if the pieces of the jigsaw are changing shape and size in front of my very eyes, then that's okay. I can respond to that. So yeah, I think I do like the idea of a jigsaw. And I also, I'm quite allergic to the idea of work-life balance, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it somehow implies that work is always bad and life was always good.
Absolutely.
And there's never the twain shall meet. I mean, my work is very much part of my identity. I get a sense of achievement that's very important to my mental well-being. The intellectual stimulation is very important for my mental well-being. So yeah, I don't think that...
I agree with that 100%, because work should be nourishing and should really be supporting your well-being. Not all of it, but there are certain things like this is a work conversation, but it's very nourishing for me, so I enjoy this. And within every person's work, there needs to be those elements that are nourishing for them, that are supportive for them. We had the CEO of Gallup actually spoke at our Sydney event, and he said that we spend 115,000 days working in our lives. I think that I hope I got that number right. But whatever the number, it's a massive part of our life. And if we don't have elements that we enjoy, of course, we're not enjoying our life. So I completely agree. And this kind of work-life balance does apply, that we there's got to be an equal balance. So I'm working now, therefore this isn't good for my well-being, then I have personal life. So it's too simplistic, I guess, for it to really be of real value. So great. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I love this concept of the jigsaw. I think that's a really good way of looking at life, and I've been using that myself actually without thinking about it in the way you described, because it feels like the puzzle comes together, like the jigsaw puzzle comes together, and you feel, oh great, I've got a piece. But then what happens, and this is life, is suddenly the puzzle suddenly gets bigger. It's like there are more pieces that need to be found because your perspective has changed, and there's new challenges, there's new pressures, there's more change. And I guess that's what, as the older I get, the more I realize that we're all dealing with pressure, challenges, and change all the time. And I used to think that the pressures will there'll be a point in time when there'll be no more pressures and I'll be able to kind of, now I've realized, well, actually the pressures just get resolved, but others come along to take their place. And I guess that's life. And that's your kind of jigsaw concept, is that we just need to let go. I love that concept: accept, let go, and do the best we can with the with the situation that we're in.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, because I also, when I was younger, used to think that I could work really, really hard, and then there would come a point where like the balance would tip, and then I would start having fun, and now I realize that's just not it. So actually, maybe I could have fun working hard, and then just seeing things in a completely different way.
Completely. It's almost like we've got to kind of go through this kind of pain now for some future joy, whereas it's like that's
never going to come.
Never going to come. It's the mindfulness. So let's kind of enjoy the present and set ourselves up for success in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
But Becky, I just want to say thank you for your time and for sharing today, and to acknowledge you for the amazing work you're doing. It really is incredible, the work that you're doing at the Ministry of Justice. I find it very inspiring, and and a great case study, I think, for sharing with our peers, because I do feel it's interesting, the evidence that that's coming through now, just to support it, but intuitively a person-centered approach makes sense. And if we can really move towards that as the norm, then I feel that a lot of these issues will start to get resolved. So congratulations for the great work you're doing. Where can people connect with you, find out more about the work that you do? I don't know, you mentioned mindfulness. I don't know if that's something you do outside of the ministry, or is that just something for the employees of the ministry?
Yeah, so I don't practice mindfulness privately. It's just something I offer in the workplace context, but slightly dull, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Becky, thank you so much for your time. Keep warm, and we'll see you next time. So, and thank you everybody for listening. Enjoy your day, and we'll be back very soon. Thank you.